It was the kind of cold that bites through denim and settles in the seams of your boots. Thursday, January 8th, 11:47 p.m., somewhere off Farm to Market Road 129, after the last gas station shut its lights and the night turned the color of old iron. My cousin Hamza and I were driving back from a drywall job, the heater coughing, the cab of the truck breathing that sour mix of coffee and gypsum dust. We weren't talking much, just that comfortable silence of men too tired to keep up a conversation. The radio low, the wipers squeaking once in a while over a dry windshield. We took a detour when we saw the red and blue pulse of an accident closing the main highway. The detour was one of those narrow county roads that felt like it was drawn with a pencil. Slim, straight, and unforgiving. No houses, no porch lights, just barbed wire fence and black pasture. The stars were crowded and cold. The moon was a thin coin. "Signal's dead," Hamza said, holding up his phone like a lighter at a concert from a decade ago. "If we break down, we push." "Don't say that," I told him, which is exactly when the truck sputtered, coughed, and died. We coasted to the shoulder, if you could call that thin strip a shoulder, and let the truck settle into a hush that was somehow louder than the engine had been. Out there, the silence had texture. You could peel it off the night. I got out, my breath turning quick and white, and popped the hood. A smell like burned pennies drifted up. My flashlight cut a cone into the engine bay. It felt like shining a light into a cave mouth. Hamza stood beside me, hands jammed into his jacket, chin tucked. "You hear that?" he said. At first, I heard nothing. Then, somewhere in the pasture, a single deliberate footstep through dry grass. Then another. Not cattle, lighter. Not a deer. Less nervous. Just a patient, unhurried moving. Across the fence, the grass was as tall as my knees, silver in the skinny moon. The flashlight found nothing except the usual: posts, wire, a rusted trough hunched like a crouched animal. But the sound kept coming, then stopped, then started again, closer, as if whoever made it wanted to check our patience for hairline cracks. "Maybe coyotes," I muttered. "Too heavy," Hamza said. We decided to wait in the truck and call for help when we got service. I killed the flashlight and closed the hood. Without the beam, the night wrapped around us like a coat that had been left outside. We climbed in, locked the doors out of habit, and sat, two men in a dead truck on a dead road in a field that had decided to pay attention. That's when the first shape stepped onto the road, about 30 yards ahead, where the pavement shone like a thin, dark river. It came from the right, slow, head low, tail level with the spine. "Wolf," my brain said, even while another part of my brain started arguing about the geography of wolves and whether I was being dramatic. Coyotes slink. Dogs lope. This thing walked like a decision. It paused, turned its head toward the truck, and let the moon draw its outline. Thick neck, thick shoulders, a face that was too long and too still to belong to anything we paid to vaccinate. Its eyes didn't shine back. They were black coins. "Don't move," I whispered, and then felt stupid, as if the truck itself could obey, and the breath fogging the windshield could be convinced to hang in place. A second shape joined the first from the left ditch. Same silhouette, same deliberate rhythm. They stood there, shoulders slightly angled, as if speaking a language of degrees. The road wasn't theirs, but they were okay with borrowing it. The truck felt small suddenly. The glass felt thinner than it had on the highway. Hamza swallowed. "We're fine," he said, and his voice trembled on the last word like a loose screw. One of the wolves stepped closer. Its paws made no sound on the asphalt. It stopped at the front bumper and sniffed, a quick, dry sound. The other drifted, toward Hamza's side, close enough that I could see the faint rime on its whiskers. I thought of the fence. I thought of the pasture. I thought of how a fence wasn't there to keep anything out, only to show you where the landowner had stopped paying attention. "Hey," I said, without thinking, as if scolding a dog. The nearest wolf looked at me, not the way animals look. Flicking, timid, curious. It looked the way a man sizes up a door. Hamza reached slowly under his seat and pulled out the tire iron. He didn't raise it. He just held it across his lap like a seatbelt he'd decided to wear late. The wolf by his door pressed its nose to the seam of the window and snuffed again. A wet circle bloomed and then faded. "Start the truck," Hamza whispered. "It's dead." "Try." I turned the key. The engine gave a reluctant grumble, then another. The dashboard flickered, went dim, then lit again. The wolves stood perfectly still, listening. On the third try, the engine caught, idles low and mean. For a heartbeat, I thought we were clear. I reached for the shifter. The wolf at the bumper reared and slammed its front paws onto the hood. Metal thudded, the truck rocked, the headlights wobbled into the pasture like a bad searchlight. The other wolf leaped and hit Hamza's door with a hollow boom that shivered through my teeth. "Go!" Hamza shouted. I jammed it into drive and punched the gas. The wolf slid off the hood, claws shrieking faintly on the paint. We lunged forward. The second wolf ran alongside the truck for 3 strides, close enough that I saw the ragged notch in its ear, and then it veered off into the dark like someone had called its name. We hit 60 1/4 mile. I didn't slow until I saw the sodium lamps of a junction and the comforting geometry of a sign. Hamza kept looking back, his breath loud. We pulled into a lot by a shuttered feed store, under a light that buzzed like a tired insect. The truck idled, and the hood showed 2 clean dents, spaced like hands. We didn't talk. We didn't laugh. Something had measured us and found our length. When my phone finally found a bar of service, I expected relief. What I felt instead was a tug, like a fish line tightening. I thumbed the maps and saw the little blue dot, the road drawn thin and pale where we'd come from. The pasture on either side was nothing but green-gray. No labels, no names, as if the land itself didn't wish to put anything there. Sometimes, late at night, the dents on the hood catch the light when I walk past. If I press my palm into one, my fingers fall into the grooves the way they do at a handprint cast in cement. I always expect it to be warm. We took that detour again, once, months later, in daylight, just to prove that we weren't the kind of men who let a road make decisions for us. There was a fence, yes, and grass that came to the knees, and a rusted trough that looked like an animal crouched and listening. We stopped the truck and stood at the wire, looking into a field that gave away nothing. "You smell that?" Hamza asked. I did. A faint metallic tang, like pennies warmed in a fist. The wind took it a second later, left us with sun and dust, and the steady tick of the engine cooling. We didn't stay long. There are places where you are the visitor, even when you bring your own road. That night, I dreamed of the fence line. On the other side, something paced, unhurried, measuring. I woke with the shape of it in my throat, a lump that wouldn't go down, a coin that had been minted with our faces and left to gleam, quietly, in someone else's pocket. It was late February, and the river ran under a thin crust of glass, slow and dark. Fahad and I had been ice fishing with his uncle north of town, a last stubborn ritual before spring. By the time we packed the auger and the bucket of skates into the trunk, the temperature had fallen into that brittle cold where every sound carries too far. Our breath drifted like smoke. The sun tripped behind the trees and left the sky shallow and hard. We took County 17 toward the old steel truss bridge, the one kids tagged in summer, and nobody crossed in winter unless they were late and proud. The tires hummed, the heater muttered. The world outside the windshield was a tunnel of gray bark and black road. "Should have left earlier," Fahad said, rubbing his hands over the vents. "I thought you wanted to see stars," I told him. "I wanted to see them from my bed." We were the only car for miles. The bridge rose ahead, a ribcage of steel, a geometry that stole perspective. As we rolled onto it, the radio fizzed and died. I hit the knob. Nothing. Halfway across, the car jolted. A sharp thump. I stopped, heart in my mouth, and watched my breath fog the glass. "Flat?" Fahad asked. I put it in park and we stepped out. The cold hit like a slap. The air was so clear it rang. Our footsteps cracked on a dusting of ice. I walked around and found the problem. Not a flat, but a tangled length of wire caught on the rear axle, trailing behind like a tail. It was old fence wire, looped and kinked, the end bitten into a hook. I crouched to tug it free. That's when I heard the claws. A faint, clicking rhythm across the bridge floor. Not hurried, not tentative, coming from the far end, from the side cloaked in thicker dark. "Do you hear?" I began, and Fahad said, "Yeah." We both straightened. The sound paused, then came again. A measured tap, 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 as if whatever made it had learned to walk in houses. I swept my headlamp down the corridor of steel. The beam extended and then swallowed itself, falling short of anything with a face. "Get in the car," I said. But the wire wouldn't loose. It had tightened to the axle and seemed to tighten more the more I pulled, as if the car itself had grown a vein and wrapped it round a bone. Fahad crouched opposite and we worked silently, our breath fogs joining, our fingers burning with cold. The tapping grew louder, then stopped. We froze, the wire biting into our palms. A shape detached from the dark at the far end of the bridge. It was large and low. It walked down the center as if it had paid for it. The headlamp skated across its fur, coarse, spiked with frost. Its eyes were dull stones. It paused, and behind it, another shape stepped into view, aligned a shoulder's width to the left. The second one's breath puffed in tiny ghosts. The wire finally slipped free with a metallic sigh that echoed down into the black water. It whipped and clanged against the truss. The two wolves stopped, listening. Then they began moving again, slow, not hurrying. They had time. The bridge gave them that. "Don't run," Fahad whispered, which made running the only thing my legs wanted to do. We backed toward the driver's side, keeping our eyes down the iron throat. We got in and slammed the doors. The small sound felt obscene. I turned the key. The engine turned, choked, and caught. The headlights lit the steel like ribs inside a whale. The wolves didn't flinch. They continued their slow approach, paws clicking faintly. The nearest came into the full wash of the beams and seemed bigger there. Details resolving you did not want. Scars at the muzzle, a torn ear, fur matted where it shouldn't be. Up close, it didn't look like a creature that belonged to anything but itself. I edged the car into gear. The bridge was narrow. There wasn't room to turn around. The only way out was through. I eased forward, and the wolves stepped to either side, the nearest sliding along the driver's edge, the other on the passenger's. They walked with us. There is a special kind of madness that comes when a wild thing decides to keep pace with you on a bridge you cannot leave. "Fahad," I said, voice tight. He had his window up and his phone in his lap, recording without thinking. His breath fogged the glass. The wolf on his side turned its head and pressed its nose to the seam of the window, leaving a dull oval that faded, reappeared with his next breath, faded again. The one on my side kept its head parallel to the road, like a runner matching a train. Halfway down, something clanged above us, a deep structural sound. The car rocked. The wolves halted and raised their heads in perfect unison, ears pricking toward the noise. Their attention shifted past us, up into the lattice. "Go," Fahad said, and I went. We eased forward. The wolves didn't follow immediately. In the rear view, I watched them stand side by side in the beams, looking up into the ribs of the bridge like there was a third thing there, something we had not seen, but they were not surprised to smell. At the far end, the tires left the iron and found real road. We kept going another 10 seconds before either of us breathed. When we did, it sounded like we'd been holding our heads under water. We didn't talk until the bridge was a bend in the mirror. Then Fahad said quietly, "They weren't after us." "What then?" Something else had crossed. He swallowed. Or stayed. At home, I listened to the recording. Mostly there was our breath and the engine's uncertain idle, and the ticking of claws on iron. But there was another sound. Too soft, rhythmic above us somewhere, as if something had been walking the beams. If you turned the volume up, you could hear the wolves stop when that sound began, and you could hear them breathe. And then, just once, One of them made a sound I have never heard from a dog or a coyote or any wild thing. A low, almost respectful exhale. I don't cross that bridge at night anymore. In the day, it's fine. Steel and rivets. Water in a slate ribbon. But sometimes when the wind is right, you catch a smell at the midpoint. Not rot, not musk. Clean, metallic, like frost on railings. I think of those two shadows pacing us and looking up. And the word that sits coldest is not fear, but recognition. The way men nod to each other when a third thing enters a room they both pretend not to see. It started with a call from the dairy manager, well after closing. "You left your toolbox," he said, voice small in the speaker. "If you want it tonight, come before midnight. I don't like being here late. I told my brother Asif I'd be quick." The dairy sat off a gravel road west of town, where the pasture broke into irrigation ditches and the fields, in winter, crusted with frost that made every weed look sugared. The sky was a low lid. Fog had rolled in at sundown and hung around like a guest who wouldn't take a hint. The dairy lot was empty. One light burned over the office door, throwing a cone across the gravel. The milking parlor beyond was dark, row after row of steel stanchions and rubber hoses like a silent organ. I found my toolbox in the office, thanked the manager, who had the look of someone dressed to run, and headed out. That's when Asif called. "You good?" he asked. "I'm fine. Leaving now. You sound like you're whispering." "I am. It's loudly quiet." On the way to the truck, I heard the first sound. A soft, almost polite clink, as if someone had nudged a metal bucket with a boot. Then another from further along the parlor. The fog drifted through the open sides, making the room both inside and outside at once. I told myself it was the building settling. Then I saw the track, in the damp dust near the drain, a paw print, larger than any dog's, clear as a stamp. The claws had pressed a second crescent each. "Hey," a voice said behind me, and I jumped so hard I almost tasted blood. It was the manager, pale under the light. "Do you hear that?" "What?" I asked, though I already knew which silence he meant. "The cows don't like the fog," he said, as if that explained anything. "They bellow usually. Not tonight." The second set of tracks came from the far end of the parlor, crossing the first. I followed them with my flashlight. They led out into the yard, across the concrete apron, and over to the feed lane, where a long concrete trough ran like a low wall into the fog. The prints went up onto the trough, down into the feed, back up out, practiced, like paths made 100 times. Asif pulled up then, his headlights turning the fog into a curtain. "Why are you still here?" he asked, stepping out, shutting his door softly like a man trying not to wake a house. I showed him the prints. He knelt and put his hand beside one, then pulled it back quick as heat. "Wolves?" "There aren't supposed to be," I said, and heard how weak that sounded. We followed the trough toward the silage bunker. The fog pressed close. You could smell feed and old milk and that strange, nicked metal smell of clean steel. Halfway down we froze. 2 silhouettes stood at the far end on the concrete apron, low, thick, motionless. One had its front paws on the lip of the bunker like a man leaning at a bar. They watched us without the mutual pretending of dogs. Asif swallowed. "We should go. Slow," I said. We backed away. The wolves matched us, step for step, not closing, not retreating. Their paws made that faint, tidy sound. Pads on concrete, claws ticking. When we reached the edge of the parlor, one of them broke the synchronized pace and slid into the shadows between the stalls, as if it had chosen a different aisle at a grocery store. The other stayed in the open. I turned my light off. The fog swallowed the beam instantly anyway, and I was suddenly sure the light only made us into little actors on a bright stage, watched by patient things in the cheap seats. "Why aren't they coming?" Asif asked, almost insulted. "Because they're counting," I said, though I didn't know what that meant until later. We reached the truck. I kept my eyes on the open doorway to the parlor. The fog there looked thicker, like breath held. Asif fumbled the keys and finally got in. I slid behind the wheel, set the toolbox on the floor, and locked the doors out of some ancient reflex that felt childish and wise all at once. We didn't start the engine. We sat. The fog moved across the windshield in slow sheets. Then, from the office window, a shape shifted, a reflection that didn't match us. The manager was inside, yes, standing still, phone to his ear. But behind him, in the glass, two long shapes faded across the reflection of the parlor door, where no light should have made them silhouettes at all. The phone rang inside our truck. The manager. I let it ring twice before answering. "They're inside," he said, voice thin. "The back door doesn't latch right." I stared toward the parlor. I couldn't see movement, only the fog, the dark steel ribs, the hoses like limp vines. But the air shifted then, a subtle change you feel more than hear, the way a room feels when someone stands up. "Asif," I said. "Seatbelt." He clicked it. I turned the key. The engine sounded obscene, too alive. The wolves didn't run. They didn't appear. But when I swept the headlight slowly across the open side of the parlor, the beam caught two smudges low to the ground, and the pale glint of eyeshine after all, duller than a cat's, steadier than a dog's. They did not blink at the light, only tilted heads by half inches, the way you do when trying to listen to water under floorboards. We eased backward toward the gate. The manager came out, hurrying, his eyes on the concrete like a man trying to read instructions in a foreign language. He climbed into his sedan without looking back and pulled out ahead of us. We followed him onto the gravel road. The fog thinned once we left the lot, as if it had been hired for a single room. On the drive home, we didn't talk. When we did, days later, we found we had the same image stuck like a splinter. Not the wolves watching us, but the moment one broke away and took a different aisle between the stalls. It felt wrong not because it was clever, but because it was ordinary, like they knew the place as well as we did, like they were there on nights when the clock dragged and milk hissed and men thought of nothing in particular. Sometimes, late, when I'm half asleep, I hear that small, neat sound of claws on concrete. I think of the fog standing in a doorway like a person keeping a secret, and I think of the counting, the way the night seemed to tally us, and something else too, and come up even. The plant closed for maintenance at 10 p.m. Anyone who has worked an industrial shutdown knows the particular emptiness of it, the great machines sleeping, the conveyor belts slack, the echo of your own footsteps turning the building into a throat. I was on lockout duty with Imran. 2 men to walk the floor, confirm valves tagged, switches thrown, gauges at 0. Outside, rain pushed at the corrugated walls. Inside, the lights were too white. Our radios hissed now and then with the bored whispers of other teams. Somewhere, deep in the building, a sump pump thudded like a heartbeat from a room we didn't open. We were in the back warehouse when the power flickered. The big overheads dimmed and then flared, and in that half-second of near dark, we both heard it. The quick skitter of claws on smooth floor, followed by a soft, decisive stop. Imran lifted his head like a deer. "You got strays?" he asked. "Cats sometimes," I said. "They come in under the loading dock." "This isn't a cat," he said. We turned the corner into the pallet aisles. The lights hummed back to normal. Long corridors of shrink-wrapped goods stood like frozen racers. At the far end of one, a shadow moved and then didn't. Low, heavy. The kind of stillness that means a thing is ready. "Hold," Imran said, like we were about to clear a room. I laughed, because that's what you do when the world takes itself too seriously, and then stopped, because the shadow unhooked itself from the floor and became legs and a spine and a head too straight. It stepped into the aisle, and another shape slid into the neighboring aisle in the same beat, separated by one wall of pallets. You couldn't see both at once. You knew the second only because the first wasn't surprised. We backed up. The radios hissed and died in our hands, the way they do when a building decides to become a cave. The wolf in our aisle paced forward, not fast, glancing once at the stacked boxes like a man checking the names on mailboxes. The other paced in the next aisle, a parallel line you could feel more than see. We ducked into a cross aisle and moved toward the loading docks. The dock doors were down, rain stuttering on the metal like 1,000 fingernails. The red chain lights glowed dull. I grabbed a dock hook, because you grab the tool that's there. Imran picked up a 2x4 with a strip of pallet, a nail in it like a tooth. We stood there like two. Men who had decided they would not run because there was nowhere to run that. Wasn't a version of, here. The wolf came to the mouth of the aisle and stopped. It looked at the door, at us, at the slick of water creeping in under the rubber lip. Its fur was wet, darker along the spine. Up this close the smell came. Not wet dog, not musk. Clean metal. Rain on a new blade. In the next aisle, the other stopped in the same position. A winter mirror. Imran did something I still don't know if I would have done. He set the board down and lifted his empty hands a little. Palms out. The way you might with a dog that's not yours but doesn't need to know it. "We're leaving," he said. We edged sideways along the dock. The wolves watched. One took a step forward, then back, as if to make sure we understood that we were writing on their paper. Outside, lightning flashed and the metal walls rattled. The wolves tilted their heads, not up at the sky, but toward the ceiling, as if there was another sound above the lights we couldn't hear. Imran and I reached the door to the office corridor. I pushed it open. It stuck on a damp mat and then gave, the edge of it squealing across tile. The squeal echoed. The wolves didn't flinch, which made my knees softer than fear did. We went through and closed the door. The thin glass had wire mesh in it. Through the mesh, the world on the other side looked like a television set tuned 1 degree off. The wolf in our aisle stepped closer and pressed its nose to the mesh. The wire distorted its face into diamonds. It inhaled. The breath fogged a single jewel and disappeared. We walked, not fast, down the office hall. Our boots squeaked. My heart rattled in my throat like a screw in a jar. When we reached the maintenance room, we slipped inside and turned the deadbolt, because the human brain loves symbols. We waited there while the rain caught its breath. We could hear, faintly, the click of claws somewhere beyond, patient, like someone flipping a magazine page. When the power hiccuped again, our emergency light glowed sickly green, and I could see my hand shake on the dock hook. After an hour, maybe less, maybe more, the radios cracked back to life. Snatches of voices, offhand and bored. We said nothing to anyone. We left through the front lobby with our hard hats on and our safety glasses hanging crooked on our collars like party favors. Outside, the rain had softened. In the parking lot, we could see 2 neat prints on the concrete near the dock ramp. They stood side by side, perfect, like someone had pressed a stamp twice and once only. The rain hadn't blurred them yet. By morning, they'd be gone. By morning, there would be nothing to say except that a shutdown is a weird time at a plant, and the air does tricks and the mind will be a partner if you let it. Sometimes I see Imran, in the break room, and we look at each other and both look up. The ceiling doesn't move, the lights don't hum. But in that tiny shared glance, there's the remembering of 2 parallel aisles, and a pair of shapes that walked them like they were born with the floor plan. And it isn't fear we share, not exactly. It's the quiet shame of having entered someone else's building without knocking. The Turnout was one of those gravel patches along State Route 6, where truckers stopped to check straps, and teenagers stopped to be teenagers. It had a view of nothing in particular, just scrub and the suggestion of hills if you taught your eyes to squint. My friend Bilal and I pulled in close to midnight because we'd missed the right exit and didn't want to overshoot by 20 miles. The night was dry, brittle, the kind of dark that makes your headlights look like lies. We killed the engine and let our ears adjust to the strange, watery quiet of big spaces. "We'll just check the map," Bilal said. 2 minutes. His phone spun its little searching wheel. Mine gave up and showed a map with no names on it, just lines like veins on a blind hand. We got out to stretch. Gravel shifted in polite complaints under our boots. A faint wind slid up from the wash and brought with it that sharp, mineral smell of rock and old water. That's when the first howl rose, thin and far, not scary yet, more like a piece of music from another room. Then a second, lower, layered under it like a harmony. Bilal looked at me, and I looked past him, toward the sage, where the plant stood like a crowd holding its breath. "Coyotes," he said. "Maybe," I said. We got back in the car. The map finally coughed up a route. We were arguing over whether to risk a dirt road when something tapped the rear bumper. A light, inquisitive knock, like a finger on a door you didn't expect to be in your house. We both twisted. The rear glass reflected the dim red glow of our own taillights, and for a heartbeat, something darker cutting that red. I turned the key to accessory so the reverse camera would wake. The little screen flickered on in black and white, grainy as a hospital hallway. The camera showed a shape crouched low behind the trunk, tail straight out like a plank. It lifted its head slowly, and the camera, with the genius cruelty of cameras, compressed the depth so the face looked flat and near. Eyes like dark thumbnails, ears sharp as cut metal. It sniffed the bumper, then looked left. In the edge of the frame, another shape slid into view, almost touching the first's flank. Bilal whispered my name and added a curse that didn't help either of us. "We're going to ease forward," I said, as if we were on a boat and not on gravel with two big animals measured along our back edge. I put it in drive and let the car roll. For a breath, the wolves stayed where they were, as if thinking. Then they began to walk alongside, one on each side, just behind the front doors, like we were a parade they had decided to join. The gravel under their paws had the dry crunch of salt. I kept my hands steady on the wheel. Bilal kept very still, as if sudden muscle movement could trip an alarm in the air. We rolled out of the turnout and onto the asphalt. The wolves kept their places. We went 10 miles per hour, then 15. They matched us until 20, when the one on my side gave a little surge and then fell back, as if testing the rule. I accelerated, 30. They dropped away a little, then reappeared at the edges of the beams, not running hard, just there, unbothered by the idea of a car. Up ahead, the road narrowed to a one lane where the county had been renewing a culvert and forgotten. The orange barrels stood in a loose line, reflective strips dull in the moonlight. On the right, an unmarked dirt road peeled off toward nothing. I signaled, ridiculous, and took it. We bounced along for maybe a quarter mile, Sage brushing the undercarriage like hands under a table. The wolves came with us. I could see their shoulders flash between plants. One leapt the wash in two clean arcs like a line drawn with a ruler. The road ended at a gate hung crooked on a single hinge. Beyond it, a field stretched raw and pale. The gate had no lock. The chain was looped, not clasped. Someone had decided the symbol of closure was enough. "Don't," Bilal said, when I reached for the chain. "We can't turn around here," I said, which was true, but also a lie. We could have done a 20-point turn and scraped our paint and maybe fed the night something small and honest. I unlooped the chain. The gate swung back with a groan that sounded like a voice being patient. We drove through. I stopped to swing it shut behind us, because there are rules you think will save you when nothing can. The field was harder than it looked. The grass was short, and the dirt had baked into a skin. We followed faint tracks toward a low hill. Halfway there, the car stuttered and died. The lights went out. The world returned to itself. We sat in the dark that piled up like blankets. Bilal's breathing went shallow. "We wait," I said, because saying a plan aloud is a way to make the seconds behave. A shape topped the low hill and stood there, outlined against a poor sky. The second joined it and sat, chest high, head up. They didn't come down. They watched. The wind had dropped. The night was a bowl. In the bowl, sounds settled where they were put. I turned the key once. The dash flickered, then died. I didn't try again. We listened to our blood. We listened to the small settling ticks of a cooling engine. We listened to the absence of insects, which was suddenly very present. Later, minutes, hours, the wolves rose and began to walk down toward us, not hurrying. From the crest of the hill to the car felt like the distance from a truth to your mouth. They stopped a few yards short of the bumper. The one on the left, scar along its muzzle like a dry riverbed, took a step closer and put a paw on the plastic strip below the plate. Its claws clicked, tiny sounds. It leaned its weight, just a little, and the car rocked, the springs speaking in a language I hadn't heard. Bilal made a small sound, the noise you make when you remember there are prayers for any season. The wolf took its paw down and looked at him, not at me. It did not blink. Without meaning to, I rolled the window down an inch. The cold came in like teeth. The smell did too, that clean metallic scent I had learned to name without a word. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted the air to be honest between us. From the hill behind them came another sound. Not a howl, a short, soft exhale. The wolves turned their heads, the exact same angle, like men attending a toast. They left us then. They turned and walked back up the hill, unhurried. On the ridge, they sat again, flanking an absence I could suddenly feel the shape of. We watched each other until the car's battery gave up the ghost, and the last of the dashboard light drained from the edges of the world. At dawn, a pale, grainy dawn, the car started on the first turn. We drove out. The gate was closed behind us. I know I shut it the night before. I know I did. The chain was looped, tidy, end tucked like a tongue. When we hit the highway, we didn't talk. Later, when Bilal told the story, he never mentioned the third thing on the hill. He said it was 2 wolves and 2 men. That's what people can sit with. But sometimes, when he thinks I'm not watching, he tilts his head a half-inch toward nothing in particular, as if listening for a clean exhale in a room we both pretend is empty.